Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome back to the 2024 World Emerging Security Forum. I hope you had a pleasant lunchtime, and now we will begin session 2. This session is titled Defending Cyberspace, Understanding the Evolution of Cyber Threats, and as you can see, we are joined by many distinguished speakers on the stage. So now I'd like to introduce them. Once I mention their names, please join me in welcoming them with a warm round of applause. First and foremost, please welcome our moderator, Ms. Ho Hyun-shin, Research Fellow of ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies. Please welcome her. Thank you. And now we'd like to introduce our esteemed panels. Mr. Neil J. Walsh, Executive Secretary of Globe Anti-Corruption Network of UN Office on Drugs and Crime and the Chief of Law Enforcement and Strategic Network is joining us here on the stage. Please welcome him. And next to him, we have Ms. Alison Pitlock, a Senior Fellow and a Cyber Program Director of Stimson Center. Please welcome her. Thank you. We're also joined by Ms. Manon Leblanc, a coordinator for cyber issues at European External Action Service. Please join me in welcoming her. And last but not least, we are joined by Ms. Irene Corpus, a member of a Strategic Steering Committee of Global Forum for Cyber Expertise. Please welcome her. With that introduction, you may have the floor, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to serve as the moderator for session 2. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs for organizing this meaningful international conference, and to the KAIST World Emerging Security Forum Secretary for their dedicated efforts in making it all possible. The more digitally advanced we become, the more cyber threats we are exposed to. South Korea has also been exposed to cyber threats across various sectors and from diverse actors. One prominent example is North Korea, which has consistently carried out the cyber attacks targeting all areas, including government agencies, the military, defense industries, and private sectors. These attacks have involved information theft, system disruption, and paralysis. More recently, North Korea seems to more focus on economic gains, such as stealing cryptocurrencies and infiltrating and snatching exchanges. These days, we are aware that the foreign information manipulation and interference by both the state and the non-state actors in cyberspace pose a serious threat to our democracy and the information integrity of a public discourse. The range of threats we collectively face in the cyberspace, hyper-connected cyberspace, is such extensive and diverse. In fact, it can feel overwhelming to even attempt to describe them all in detail. In this regard, I need to narrow down our discussion scope. This session aims to examine the evolving landscape of cyber threats that the world commonly faces, and to share information on each region or organization's approaches, strategies, policies, and the legal institutions in response. By fostering mutual understanding of global cybersecurity issues, the session seeks to explore ways to strengthen capacities for effective responses. Additionally, it will provide an opportunity to deliberate on how to establish accountability for cyber threats or breaches. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome and my sincere thanks to distinguished session panelists who have taken valuable time to visit Korea and join us here today. We will proceed with 4 speakers for this session. I expected more times to given to you, but actually our session was being shortened, so I will give you 5 minutes for each. So let me move on to a short of common question first. How do you assess the recent cyber threats, including in the context of other security threats? You may analyze it comprehensively or picking up specific issues relating to your field. Okay, I will give you first, Neil.
Kamsahamnida, and good afternoon, everybody. I think we get the tough job of being first up after lunch, so you've all got to stay awake and we can see you from here. My huge thanks to Ministry of Foreign Affairs for bringing us here, and I think if ever there's an example of what a resilient democracy looks like, it's you. So I think you've done remarkably well over the past couple of days. I think the way the threat landscape has changed over the past few years shows how interconnected everything is, and that we risk going down a path where we say this is simply a cyber thing or a crime thing or a security thing. And perhaps counterintuitively, we end up in a space where we try securitizing too much whilst missing the opportunities for engaging the wider public on all of the issues that we try to face. If we look back during COVID, the impact that our kids had with schooling online and then the maneuver and the moving of so many things in our lives to being online, we saw the opportunities that criminals were taking of sexual exploitation, of the misuse and abuse of fraud, and all of the things that we've seen now and emerging into a different space. And very much from listening to the panel this morning, especially the first panel, there's so many crossovers in the crime space and the broader national security space. So I think we have to take a step back and really have a good strategic threat intelligence picture where we, either as an individual nation, as a region, as the world, have a better measure of what those threats look like and what the responses might look like as well. Part of that means that we have to speak a language that the general public understand. If we can't sit on TV or go into a school or university and say something in a way where someone walks away changing their behavior or at least having a better consideration of risk, then we're not doing our jobs properly. And we need to do that in a way that is culturally nuanced, that is gender nuanced, that is age nuanced as well. Because the risks that we saw a few years ago, for example, those who were being sexually extorted online, everyone thought that this was kids, teenagers, early adults. But there is certainly a demographic of older adults being extorted as well, and they don't have the mechanism to reach out for help. So in summary, a very long way to go. International treaties can grow, legislation and policy can grow, but if you don't apply that, if you don't understand that as a regular member of the public, then it's missing the point.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Neil more focused on non-state actors' point and then individual level of cybercrime aspects more. And then I want to turn to Manon. And then Manon is working in the EU External Service Center. So Manon will explain more about the state actor perspectives to us. Thank you, Manon.
Thanks, indeed. Building also on what Neil said, the security landscape has really changed due to the number, the type of incidents that we see, but foremost also due to the context that we are working with, the geopolitical dynamics, the conflict, the competition which we are now in a global stage, but also the developments that we had in our use of technologies, notably also due to the COVID-19 pandemic, where many more people got connected globally, which increased also the attack surface. And then we're having this discussion that we had this morning about more technologies and newer technologies coming to the table and the impact that they have on the cyber threat landscape. And there we see that dependency in combination with the geopolitical dynamic really creates risky situation, creates security challenges that go down to the essence of your society. Think about cyber attacks against your critical infrastructure, where suddenly you wouldn't have clean water, you would not have energy, you would not have a banking system, you would not have a GPS because satellites are being impacted. So there is a great challenge that we need to tackle and that we need to solve with each other in order to be able that the functioning of our societies can continue. And here we see, because of that connectedness, that where in the 90s we were worried about internet worms or whatnot, that now we're talking really about attacks that go deep into our critical infrastructure, ransomware attacks, that cripple hospitals, also the access to such attacks that have grown in that sense, with activists hacking for service situations, but also cyber used in military conflict. So we see it really across the board entering into our systems, entering into our daily lives. Cyber as a domain, which was also mentioned this morning, is something that in the late 90s was less of a worry than we have today. And then on top of that, where cyber indeed in and of itself is a tool, is a weapon, but also an enabler, we see really cyber being used by state actors as a tool of statecraft. And a tool of statecraft next to other tools. So we see cyber as one of the instruments being used next to foreign interference and manipulation of information, sabotage activities, arson, instrumentalization of migration. So really scanning vulnerabilities of societies, of which cyber security and cyber vulnerabilities is one, and exploiting them to destabilize and with an aim to disrupt or destruct or destabilize societies, is something that is of the worry nowadays. So where we came from with situations where ICT security issues were really in a vacuum, so to say, we now see that cybersecurity issues are part of a broader strategy in order to address vulnerabilities in our societies, and that is something that is of increasing concern. So not cyber as such only, but cyber also in the broader context of these geopolitical dynamics.
Thank you, Manu. I want to turn to Alison. Alison, you're mainly interested in kind of international cyber security governance, and the UN, you're working on the UN structure as well. So I'm wondering your view over cyber threats, kind of global perspectives, and then how related to international governance issues as well.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And thanks very much to all the hosts and organizers for inviting me to participate. I've really been enjoying the discussion throughout the day, and I look forward to seeing where we go this afternoon. And indeed, yes, I actually was at the UN on Monday at one of the sessions of the UN's open-ended working group on cybersecurity issues. And on the first day of the session is always the day when they talk about the cyber threat landscape. So I feel like it's kind of a long week of cyber threat discussions this week. But maybe to reflect a little bit on like what I heard there, because there are many ways to try to unpack and describe the evolving threat landscape. You can talk about specific actors, you can talk about different tactics and techniques, and I think that that's maybe not where I'm coming to this from, but maybe to talk a little bit about the impacts and the implications for international peace and security of different of those types of operations and activities. And I would really sort of foot stomp what Manon said about remembering that cyber operations are a tool and an extension of other politics and other considerations as well. You know, I think there is a lot of concern about the use of cyber operations within conflict. We've seen this in Ukraine, we've seen this in Gaza. This has implications for the protection of civilians and civilian objects, for humanitarian operators, and also, of course, for the risks of escalation of that conflict. But apart from direct conflict, cyber operations are also part of the toolkit of hybrid warfare or coercion, and they can sometimes accompany other tactics that are occurring below the threshold of conflict. More and more countries are establishing cyber commands or developing offensive cyber capabilities. This is also raising questions about how to govern that, or what is considered responsible use of such capabilities. There is a lot of concern about critical infrastructure attacks. As was already said, infrastructure such as power grids, hospitals, water supplies, transportation systems are increasingly reliant on digital networks. So when those systems are compromised or affected, they can have significant disruptions and pose threats to public safety, potentially also leading to other destabilization or conflict. And then sort of in the cyber, but maybe not, basket of activities that I think is on the mind of many these days are exactly these foreign influence or information operations, which are having a lot of impact on electoral processes and integrity in different countries around the world. 2024 has been a year of an unprecedented amount of national elections worldwide, and I think that that has really helped to bubble to the surface concern about this issue. And then last but absolutely not least are the implications for human rights and fundamental freedoms, where we're seeing the compounding effects of ICT misuse on marginalized individuals and communities, and the implications for upholding and protecting human rights are increasingly well documented, but they're coming from a range of different concerns, whether it's from the use and sale of surveillance technologies, of intrusion capabilities, infringements of privacy rights through other means, and so forth. So I'll pause there, but that's reflecting back a little bit about what I heard earlier this week.
Thank you, Alison. I will turn to Irene. You've been a lot of experiences in MENA region. So can you explain or describe the cyber threat situations in the MENA regions especially? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for the grateful invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. As we delve into the topic, it is essential to acknowledge the interconnected factors shaping cyber risks in the region, in the MENA region. It's Middle East and North Africa. The geopolitical tensions, economic instability, and rapid technological advancements are redefining the cyber threat landscape. In the Middle East, critical infrastructure in sectors like what you have already mentioned as well, but uniquely, the oil and gas sector, the energy, these are the major target for state-sponsored cyber attacks. These threats, including ransomware and supply chain compromises, are not random. They are deliberate actions aimed at destabilizing economies, creating public uncertainty, and undermining trust. At the same time, the rise of social media has also been a powerful weapon for disinformation during political unrest and manipulating the public opinion. Various activist groups sympathetic to different sides have engaged in cyber attacks. These activities aim to disrupt the services and influence the perception, like that of the hacktivist Anonymous, which disrupts via DDoS, or distributed denial of service, website defacement, data breaches, and propaganda campaigns. Addressing these growing challenges demand not only vigilance, but also proactive and collaborative strategies. Then what is the impact in international peace and security? These cyber threats transcend borders, impacting international peace and security. These rival nations weaponize cyberspace, escalating tensions through espionage and offensive operations. Geopolitical rivalries also heighten these confrontations, targeting the critical assets that fuel the region's instability. What are the consequences for critical infrastructure in the Middle East? In 2012, the Shamoon attack on Saudi Aramco impacted more than 30,000 computers. They were totally wiped out. It was a wake-up call, wiping data from all of the 1,000 service devices, which was implemented at the time of the start of a long weekend or holiday. Its resurgence as Shamoon 2 in 2016 is an evidence that they continuously evolve. If there is a version 1 of Shamoon, there is a version 2.0 of Shamoon. Also think about the WannaCry that demonstrated the escalating risks globally. Additionally, there are advanced persistent threat actors that also target aviation, energy, and other infrastructure sectors. The emerging technologies and their implications, particularly AI and quantum computing, continue to evolve to provide evolution of cyber threats. The AI enhances threat detection, but at the same time, it is also used to enable advanced attacks. Like AI, the quantum computers can also be considered as a double-edged sword. So this evolution of attacks also come from the technology that we think will evolve as a use and a means for us to progress further using the technology in a better way. What I would like to point out here is it's not only about the evolution of the technology, but also the importance of having capable resources to handle these evolving threats. I would talk about 3 pillars: capacity building, policy implementation, and capable resources. I will stop on that, and we'll talk further about the capability development.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your describing cyber threat landscapes. Then shall we move on to discuss how we are responding to these cyber attacks, cyber threats, or what kind of responses we might be necessary. So you may answer from the angle of a region, like a EU, or a sector, like a cybercrime, or and then or organization, UN, or as well. Yeah, it depends on you guys. Yeah, please, Alison, start from you. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, it's I mean, there's a lot of different responses that are being employed to prevent, to reduce, to address cyber threats and their impact, and they exist at the national level, at the multilateral level, even at the local level to protect relevant critical infrastructures. I think, though, that what we're finding, though, is it's not enough, right? Like the threat landscape isn't going away. It's changing. We're seeing different actors come in, different capabilities. A lot of people are talking about how the severity of impacts are increasing as well, which leads one to, of course, ask, what more can we do? So at the multilateral level, anyway, the sort of established baseline for action is something that's increasingly being referred to as a UN framework for responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs. The framework is premised on the agreement that international law applies to state conduct in the use of ICTs. This is an output of a UN process that concluded 2015? Yes, okay. 2011, maybe, no. And it's accompanied by the articulation of 11 voluntary non-binding norms that are also meant to supplement the agreement of international law applying to state conduct. So at the multilateral level, this framework is often taken to be the sort of baseline for accountability in malicious cyber activity. But there's different tools and mechanisms on how that can be enforced. I think there's a sense that there is a bit of an accountability gap right now because it's not having a deterring effect, especially against state actors and pursuing malicious cyber activity. Different regions, I'm sure we'll hear, have developed different other mechanisms, other tools, other tactics that they can look to. Cyber sanctions are increasingly common. We're also seeing a growth in more like-minded coalitions of states working together to address specific cyber threats. So more recently, the Pall Mall process is looking at commercially available cyber intrusion capabilities as a very focused area of work. The International Counter-Ransomware Initiative is working together across many states and some other partners as well to address the problem of ransomware. So we're seeing these sort of supplementary initiatives within like-minded coalitions of states to address some very specific threats. But I also think, and Stimson has recently concluded a long research project on the topic of cyber accountability, in which we, sort of set out to say that deterrence isn't working. Well, I mean, I think deterrence has long been sort of dismissed as just being different in the cyber domain, a bit of a square peg in a round hole, if you will. And so we need to reframe and rethink about that and look for other methods and mechanisms and levers that can be applied. And a lot of the ones I've just talked about, sanctions and so forth, those are often associated with negative understandings of accountability, the imposition of costs and consequences for bad behavior. But I think what's also starting to hear more about, and that I think really does need to be examined by the international community, are also positive forms of accountability? What are the incentives? How do you incentivize compliance? How do you incentivize doing the things that lead to cyber resilience and keeping us all safer together, especially in an issue like cyber, which is so transboundary?
Thank you, Alison. And then what about Manon? I think you have a lot of things to talk about it. Yeah.
Thanks. No, I agree with Alison there. There's a lot of ways to tackle these threats, and because of the complexities of these threats and being so close to the core of our societies, it's not just a silver bullet. There's no one solution that would fix this problem. But let me maybe emphasize three angles on which I think the main lines of work also in the EU are done when it comes to addressing these type of threats. So first of all, around resilience and preparedness. So what we have seen when it comes to the cyber threat landscape, cyber attacks, and we've, for instance, also seen it in Ukraine with the number of attacks that they have suffered from Russia, is that resilience actually works. So making sure that you are deterrent by having a resilient system, by being able to withstand, to counter these attacks, to not have them affect you in the first place, is, I think, one of the most important things that can take place. And therefore, it's so important that we, around the globe, invest in capacity building efforts to ensure that actually all states are able to enhance their cyber resilience and to actually protect themselves from these type of threats, but also are prepared in case these come anyways, because it's not that because you're resilient that these attacks are not coming. I think the reality is, unfortunately, that we will not necessarily live in a world without cyber attacks. They're looking at, okay, what is my whole of society approach? How can I involve everyone around cybersecurity, including also the end user, making them resilient, making them aware of the cyber threat, and making them part of the security solution? Private sector, the cooperation with private sector around secure products and services, where in the EU we have developed what is called the Cyber Resilience Act, ensuring that there's actually security by design and secure products and services coming to the market, but also involving the private sector in your incident response and in your response to cyber attacks. Evolving your foresight and your understanding of these threats, something that Neil also mentioned before. Really, that's where it starts, to have a good understanding of what are my vulnerabilities, what are the threats coming at us, and what can we actually do to mitigate these up front. So having your resilience and being prepared for these cyber attacks is really the baseline of preventing and responding to these cyber incidents. Secondly, talking about what is your response then, and what kind of tools do you have to deter and to respond to malicious cyber actors. And what we have been trying to do indeed is using diplomatic measures to prevent, deter, respond to malicious cyber activities coming from particular threat actors. So imposing sanctions, imposing costs through attribution or through other means. But we also see that in that sense, that is not necessarily enough. And that we also have to look at other more asymmetric measures, looking at the persistent threat actor, looking what is actually its driver, what is its motives, and how can we influence the behavior by using the full range of tools that we have at our disposal, including economic tools, including political instruments, to influence persistent threat actors and ensuring that we deter and respond to their behavior. And let me then thirdly point out something that we're also here for today, is international cooperation. Indeed, international cooperation to exchange on the understanding of the threat landscape, to build capacities, to enhance resilience, to be able to prepare for responding to these type of attacks, to together actually deter and respond by really having this normative base around what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior, and working together as a global community to enhance that accountability, to promote responsible state behavior as agreed in the United Nations in 215 main report there. But I think there what is important is that we understand that as a global community we do have the power to come together and to set that baseline and to promote that responsible state behavior, including by really incorporate it into our national systems and ensuring that there is this normative baseline of what can be done and what cannot be done. And maybe lastly to say that in this view, James said something very nice, like the kitchen debates, right? And I fully agree that international cooperation is as such a kitchen debate that we need to take place, but I think we also need to move on and actually cook a dinner together and make sure that we're not only debating and discussing the UN framework for responsible state behavior, but that we're also cooking this dinner and making sure that we implement what is being discussed there, because that is actually the baseline for stability and security in cyberspace, and that will also enable to hold those actors who are not behaving responsible accountable for what they're doing in cyberspace.
Okay. Thank you, Manu. Okay, so I want to slightly change the approach, a little bit more practical approach, more cooking. So let's turn to Irene and Neil. So how do you think about how do you think about the approach, the response we need to take for the cyber threats in your perspective, like a more practical level? Because you worked in the capacity building sector for a long time. So how do you train? How do you work in your field? So please.
Thank you. Again, good question. When we talk about capacity building, our intention is to build resources, not in a difficult way. Otherwise, you'll be scaring them the more from joining your workforce. What I can see would be a good approach is to provide them the initial knowledge by looking at what is already existing. Let us not reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of best practices out there that can be used, such as, for example, the management systems, the ISO 27001, Information Security Management System. Let's also look at the CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, or the NIST. These are already existing, let's say, standards and framework which have already also been proven effective. You don't need to memorize them. You don't need to really be 100% knowledgeable about it, but just to create awareness and build the capability as a starting point, letting them know what standard means, what are the policies, how policies play in cybersecurity, what are the standards, what are within the standards. Looking at this, there's more than 100 controls, but do you need to know all of them? Do you need to implement all of them? It's about prioritizing. So this is what I believe would be a good way to build a capacity and capability, not scaring them because of all of these technical terms, technical jargons. It's like the way you mentioned about cybersecurity is already a threat to them not to go into the cyber. But also, making them aware that there are a lot of opportunities for knowledge sharing and growth. Let's say the GFCE, there's a capacity building program that is customized, not really customized, but they aligned with the various region according to their capabilities, their strengths, their capacities, and there are regional hubs as well that wherein the strategy are cascading. Likewise, coming from the MENA and also part of the Women in Cybersecurity Middle East, we also build women capabilities by letting them be engaged in various training and mentorship program, letting them be involved in discussion, panel discussion, conferences, and in fact, we have seen a big increase of women participation, especially with the recently concluded Black Hat conference, wherein they said, the Black Hat, you know, they go around the world and they said, it is surprising that it is in the Middle East where they found the most number of women speakers. So it is not only about building capacity, we're also trying to address the diversity and inclusion of women in the cyber.
Okay, thank you. Actually, the women in cybersecurity was my last question, but you snatched. Okay, later I will ask again. Okay, and then the last turn, Neil. Especially in cybercrime field, we need to internationally cooperate definitely for the investigation and then the indictment, everything. So we are wondering your perspective. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I tend to frame most problems that we have to address as government as being political, policy, strategy, tactics, or operations. So from the political piece of having the right view from government, having the right expertise in our ministers and in our senior civil servants, and then getting the right policy, and then bringing that down to an operational level. How do you triage? How do you prioritize the threats and the threat actors that you're facing? But there's also a responsibility in this for the tech sector, and something that was said this morning stuck with me, which is on the decision-making of developers and engineers. And I remember being at a counter child abuse conference back in 2017, where a tech developer stood up and showed what was essentially their first version of auto-tune for musical artists who needed to have a re-record done without being in the studio. And he said, "Isn't this fantastic?" And everyone in the audience said, "Oh God, no, it's not." Because we could see the risk that would come with it. And we saw the risk of developing skill sets to harm and abuse and exploit children using the same technology. So it seems to me in many ways, anything can be dual use. If I hit myself over the head with a plastic bottle, it's been used for an intent that it wasn't created for. So we have to think through the risk and get our policy built around that. And it's also the somewhat didactic security and safety issue that you heard of this morning as well. If we look at, on Monday this week, I was speaking to a load of diplomats in Vienna, and one of them asked me, should we just make cryptocurrencies illegal? And that would solve the problem. And I said, well, terrorism's illegal, crime's illegal, I'm not quite sure we're there yet. And it's taking that conversation, because sometimes the idea sounds perfectly good, but trying to make it happen is impossible. And especially with something like crypto, where it's actually developed not to be easily traceable. And by saying that to a diplomat, well, there's 10,000 plus cryptocurrencies in the world right now, with a market capitalization of $3 trillion and $200 billion per day moving in crypto, it would be the 8th largest economy if it was a country. So we have to look at the problem in a different way. We have to look at different solutions. So in the UN, UN member states have recently come up with a UN Cybercrime Convention. I'm calling it that. That's not its full title. Its title is very long. But for the sake of saving time, it's a Cybercrime Convention. And I guess in some ways this reassures me that multilateral diplomacy can still work. That there was 155 states got together in a room over 3 years and hashed this thing out. And that it's criminalized 11 aspects of cybercriminality. And that helps every government potentially enact that in their own national legislation as well. And then you have the equivalence, hopefully, of evidence and the ability to gather evidence, whilst having the strongest framework on human rights in any UN crime-based treaty that we've had before. But in my last posting, I moved back to Vienna 2 months ago, and my last posting in Eastern Africa as head of mission for our organization, seeing the different skill sets across countries in Eastern Africa was remarkable. And that's why capacity building can never and never will be one size fits all. You might have a country that has remarkable technical capability, but politically and at policy level doesn't necessarily get the nature of the problem. And you might have the opposite of that, of having a country that absolutely gets the political and policy implication, but doesn't have the ability to invest in what that solution looks like. So I guess it's still remaining technologically neutral. One of my staff always refers to the problem is between the chair and the keyboard. And yeah, so I guess the human problem, and that came out very much in the first panel this morning, is really where we have to look at, because you can't eat a convention, you can't drink a convention. You need to be able to operationalize something to make a difference, which means understanding that threat and that it may be specific and different in different countries as you go around the world. So if we look at how the impact of large language models have had an understanding, for example, the risks against kids online, or the proliferation of sexually abusive material, or terrorist radicalization, most of the work is still being done in English, and the large language models are then investing in English solutions. So how much are we missing in there? What's the nuance that's happening in Korea or Japan or anywhere that is francophone or lusophone? We need to make sure that there's an equity there that I don't think we have right now. So lots of work to be done, and lots of gaps that still need to be filled. And I guess to finish off that question is, we see so many agencies that have an offensive capability, and ironically, a part of that agency is also the defensive capability. It's kind of like they're trying to do each other, and it seems to me that's perhaps not the most helpful way of doing business.
Thank you, Neil. Yes, we finished the common questions about the cyber threats we face commonly, and how do we respond to commonly. And then, because we have a precious expert in each field of cybersecurity here, from now on, I would like to cast questions more specialized for each of you. So when you find some points that you want to add, just please ask me, jump in. Yeah, okay, for Manon first. I know you served for years to develop EU cybersecurity strategies and the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox. So could you explain the special efforts or institutional preparation that the European Union has been making recently to address the cyber threats as a prominent regional organization, international organization? Yes.
Thanks. So what I spoke about before, about this full spectrum approach, and that is something that we are looking at when it comes to countering cyber threats. And let me elaborate a bit on what we mean with that. So the idea of one size fits all, a silver bullet that will help you counter cyber threats and then you will be safe forever, doesn't necessarily exist. So there's a constant effort to be made across the spectrum in order to prevent, deter, respond to malicious cyber activity. So what does it mean? Raising awareness, having awareness campaigns, making sure that end users are aware. In product development, making sure that we have secure ICT products and services coming to the market by legislation. By protecting critical infrastructure, and we've recently adopted and implemented our second cybersecurity legislation, the NIS2, Network and Information Security legislation. But also by updating our cyber diplomacy toolbox on how you respond to malicious cyber activities, adding also rapid response capabilities to it to help member states but also partners in responding to incidents. Updating our incident management framework, and by establishing a cross-institution task force that allows us to better understand cyber threats and also use a full range of tools to respond to it. By I'm moving along the spectrum by adding new cyber sanctions to our list, as well as also establishing a new regime against hybrid threats stemming from Russia, which also includes cyber and other cyber-related listing criteria, but also by adding a cyber defense policy that will actually enable us to enhance our resilience of our military systems and enhance our military cooperation. So what we are looking at is really trying to, across the spectrum, ranging from really this awareness, prevention, capacity building, up to also response measures that will help us to mutually assist each other, whether it's within the EU or our partners, as well as respond to malicious cyber activities, to really develop all these tools that will help us address cyber threats in different perspectives. And what helps here is that we actually have really strong partnerships. So within the union, we are with 27. 27 see more, we're together in networks, at the technical level, at an operational level. We have a network of cyber ambassadors where we work together on a political, a strategic level. So we have the advantage of being stronger together. And we also have that advantage in that sense in a global way. So when we look at the cooperation, as also Alison mentioned, at the multilateral level, we've been working also to establish this community within the United Nations. So through the open-ended working group and through the work that we've been doing there over the last couple of years, we have established this global community on enhancing peace and security in cyberspace. And there we are actually working to strengthen even that network by giving it a home, by establishing a permanent mechanism, a program of action in the United Nations to really build on that foundation that we have discussed also this morning and just now of the UN framework of responsible state behavior grounded in the application of international law, and giving also the international community a home where they can build their cybersecurity, when they can cooperate and where they can learn from each other to protect their critical infrastructure and incident response, like we also do in the EU. So it's really this trying to, at each level, but also in each community, to build your tools in order to prevent, deter, and respond to cyber threats.
Thank you very much, Manon. Manon, have you read about the Korean National Cybersecurity Strategy before?
And you're posing this question in front of ambassadors. So well, of course.
Of course.
So we've had an exchange. I will admit I have not read it in detail necessarily, but I do see a lot of similarities between the approach that the Republic of Korea is taking and the approach that the EU are taking. And there's actually a close partnership between the EU and ROK on these issues. So we're very much aligned in that sense, and I'm looking forward to continue to discuss that also during our upcoming cyber dialogue. So.
Thank you so much. And then let's turn to Neil. Actually, Neil, in Korea, just a few months ago, there was a significant social issue involving the use of deepfakes for disincriminate sexual online crimes. So the more alarming aspect was that many of perpetrators actually, it was not legislated as a crime yet. And then who were minors, the perpetrators, most of them were minors. It didn't even recognize their conduct as crimes. And then the victims, shockingly, were often people close to them, such as classmates, their teachers, fellow students, or even younger sisters. So since the Budapest Convention in the last August, the draft UN Crime Convention was completed and under the process of being adopted in the UN. And then what do you think about the relevance of deepfakes and AI technologies, which can be also used for cybercrime itself? And then to countering cybercrime and the enhancing cybersecurity. So kind of the flip side of one coin, like, yeah. And then what impact do you anticipate the UN Cybercrime Convention will have on this kind of prevention and the punishment of such cybercrimes? Yeah, the two questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Suyan. I think your reliance on my memory is vastly better than I think my memory is going to be at remembering the questions. So, let's think of the deep fake issue is really, really concerning. And I think I look at it in a number of ways. So first off, the technology exists. We've known the risks that are going to come with it, but yet we didn't really do much about it or consider it properly. I'm not sure that we would say that criminalizing kids as offenders is the right approach. In fact, I would almost certainly say most times it's not. if children aren't recognizing that what they've done is breaking the law, is creating risk, that's an educational problem. That's a social problem that needs to be addressed first, and we don't fix that problem by locking them up unless it's the most serious of offences. But that's certainly not unique to Korea. That has happened and continues to happen around the world. And in fact, the UK-based Internet Watch Foundation just released its annual report, and they take down child abuse material from the internet. And 97% of victims are girls, and the average age of a girl being victimized for sexual exploitation online is between 10 and 13. And in addition to that, they've seen a significant, since COVID, increase of sibling-based sexual abuse, where one sibling exploits the other for payment. And these are the things that are happening in our societies, in our homes, right now. And if we don't listen to that and accept that as a risk of something we need to address, then we are not saving kids who need our biggest and most greatest of attention. There's also the wider critical thinking piece, and this came up at lunch, where I look at my own kids, and so much of their homework now is done online, schooling is done online, and the ability to question the sourcing of what they've learned. And Jim said this morning when we were talking, you stick something into ChatGPT, you might get a perfectly plausible answer coming out, and then you try and find the source, and there is no source, it's just made it up. You know, if I want to make something up, I'll speak to someone. So the critical thinking piece of asking, what was the source of this? Is it real? What's the impact of that? I think we end up with a generation who are at risk of seeing something and believing automatically that it's true. And then with that, not understanding with the level of detail the consequence of doing something with it. And that's where I think if you've had the experience of kids committing offences but not realising that they were committing offences, so that has to be an educational problem and an educational fix and a parental responsibility as well. And if parents and educators aren't willing or able to have these difficult conversations, they are failing the generation below them. It is our responsibility as the adults to understand that risk and be able to explain it without getting embarrassed, without feeling taboos pressing on us, but to help keep our kids safe. When we bring that to a wider level, if I look at the investigative capability that my office, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, gives and builds with states, I used to run our cybercrime programming around the world, so that was working with cops and prosecutors and judges to help them build this skill set. I now run our anti-corruption work, but one part of that, called our Globe network, has 200 investigative agencies working together on corruption. And I'm starting the conversation with corruption investigators to understand why this piece of the business on the cyber side is so important to them doing their business as well. But sometimes I think multilaterally in the sort of higher political bits of the UN, we still have problems where the security piece that Manon talks about is in one part of the UN, the crime piece is in another, and never the twain shall meet. And if you even try and bring up the crime piece and the security piece, you'll be told this is the wrong committee for that discussion. I'm pretty sure the criminals aren't sitting out there going, haha, we got them, it's in the first committee and not the third. So we have to look at what the threat is and build our response around that. And I think that means being slightly more flexible in our multilateral and bilateral institutions. And sometimes it's following what the criminals do and saying our response has to follow that, rather than forcing it into a fixed position that we might have had for some years. So the threat is hybrid, so we should make sure the response is the same.
Okay, thank you, Neil. In the very similar vein with Neil, I want to ask Alison. It's about the cyber accountability. You already touched upon a little. Enhancing cyber accountability is likely the key to reducing cyber threats and safeguarding cybersecurity. So could you give us your esteemed opinion on this matter? Why do we enhance cyber accountability? And then what's the biggest kind of a barrier or obstacle to enhance cyber accountability? And then how can we enhance cyber accountability? More details, please. Yes.
I really wish I had like a the silver bullet, as it were, for accountability, but I'm not sure that it's out there. But I'll share what we've learned so far. But first, I wanted to also just quickly react a little bit to what you said about the crime and security sort of separation, especially when you get into some of the UN processes on this issue. Recently we've also been doing a little bit of work around the UN Security Council, where the Republic of Korea has convened 2 important meetings over this past year on cyber issues. And in the course of, kind of informally talking with them about their preparations for the events, this exact topic came up. Like, does it need to be crime? Does it need to be security? Sometimes that line is actually very blurry. Sometimes criminal activities affect national security or international peace and security. And so while it is important to make space to create the sort of detailed policy responses that are needed for distinct issues, artificially or consistently always separating these 2 things out can also be harmful. And it also, I think there's a further risk too when you start talking about security, that you really leave out the sort of human impacts, and the topic itself just becomes very securitized. And certainly I know within the open-ended working group and elsewhere, we've tried to bring the other human-centric approach in which we refer to sort of the rights-respecting or rights-based approaches to cybersecurity. But on accountability, I don't know that I would actually have much more to add to what I said earlier, that there is an accountability gap, and we know this because we're not seeing any abatement in the severity or the scale or the spread of malicious cyber activity, be they full-on attacks or other activities that are more disruptive or more to be considered nuisances. And so that tells us that something more is needed to be done in this space. And I think that's sort of where our research looked at what's worked well in non-cyber issue areas. We did a big study looking at everything from conventional weapons, arms control instruments, to UNSCR 1540, to some climate agreements, and to some others as well, peer review mechanisms, these types of things, to sort of see like what has worked well elsewhere. And I think that across the board, there's a lot of very specific learnings that you can get from these different regimes or issue areas that are in some way, shape, or form relevant to cyber. There's never going to be an exact grafting on that you can sort of do from one issue set to another. But I think across the board, some of the very important findings that we came across was the importance of inclusivity. And this is going to be, I think, extra important in cyber or any technology-related issue area, is to be multi-stakeholder in crafting the solutions that you're looking for. Cross-regional collaboration is also highly important. We also found that where you often have a sort of toolbox approach, rather than trying for like a one-size-fits-all, is also where we've seen the most impact and effect in other issue areas. But I think the biggest barrier that we really came across, and this is, I don't know what the answer is to getting over this, is simply political will. Even where you see like really wonderful ideas and very long-standing agreements. I started my career working on the anti-landmines campaign, and I was there when the Cluster Munitions Treaty was negotiated, adopted, and entered into force. And we've now seen backsliding on those agreements from states that were at one time very supportive of them. So I think that without strong political will, and maybe the answer to political will is thinking through the incentivization piece a little bit more, but that's where we really start to run into the problems with the accountability gaps.
Thank you, Alison. I think you explained well the kind of dynamics, how we organize the structure of the accountability in cyberspace. And actually in cyberspace, the most important and difficult thing is attribution issues, because attribution is not exact and quick enough. All the accountability issues starts from that attribution issues. So yeah, I think you explained very well about it. Let's move on to Irene. Irene, I think you have decades experiences in the cyber, AI, and quantum capacity building sectors, especially in MENA. Could you give us some insights from your perspectives, especially bridging capacity building and cybersecurity? And I know you already slightly touched upon these issues. And in addition, I know you've especially focused on women in cybersecurity, a Middle East project. Women in cybersecurity capacity building is also a very important topic, but now well noticed in South Korea, in my view. So would you share your experience with us here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The Women in Cybersecurity Middle East, we founded it in 2018. There were only 9 of us at that time, 4 of us from the UAE, 1 from Kuwait, 1 from Saudi, another one from Egypt. Now we have grown up to 3,000, almost 3,000, and it was a good platform for the women in cyber to get into the field. When we started that, there were only 12% of women in cybersecurity. Last year, there was a survey that was conducted, and the percentage of women now is at 25%. We are not saying that it is only the work of the WIXME or the Women in Cybersecurity, but we believe that there is already an increase in awareness of improving this number, improving the participation of women, welcoming them, especially the newcomers, the new students. Look at the statistics of how many women or how many girls are getting into the field of engineering and IT, and how many of them in the end get employed. So we have to look into these statistics. They may not be our sisters, they may be our children, or the female children who are really, their hearts, they put their hearts and their efforts into this degree. Let's help them get into this industry. The GFCE as well, WIXME partnered or participated with GFC only this year because we found this as another option or another platform to improve our presence and improve the voice of creating the awareness for improving the women's participation in cybersecurity. So at GFCE, we also have the WICB, or Women in Cyber Capacity Building. And GFCE, it's a network of regional hubs. We have regional hubs in Asia, Americas and Caribbean, Europe, Africa, the Pacific, and Southeast Asia. These hubs take into account the unique and local regional cybersecurity, cultural, institutional, and development characteristics. Like what you were saying, Mano, there is no one or one-size-fits-all way. Even in the capacity building, there's no one-size-that-fits-all. It has to be according to the region, according to the culture, according to the capacities and the environment. The other thing that WIXME is doing is we partner with, last year we partnered with ITU, or the International Telecommunications Union. They have the yearly Women in Cyber mentorship program. It's a 3-month program. And we were happy because they gave the management or handling of the participants from the MENA region. Before, there were a low number of MENA participants because of language barrier. So what we did, we transformed or translated some of those programs in Arabic. And it was a very good turnout because out of 300 participants, about 300 participants, 30% came from the MENA. So it means all the rest are from the other regions. So this is a good demonstration that we are building, or our program is being heard and being known in the region. Other program that we did was the Capture the Flag, or the live hacking. And the Capture the Flag, what we did as a program on the first year was, and this, it is still let's say the criteria. If you're going to join as a group, at least one should be a woman, one female. So if you're all men, sorry, you cannot join. At least bring at least one woman in your group. So from year 1, year 2, year 3, the number of participants increased, and not only that, the number of women also increased from 30%, 50% to 60%. So I believe with all of these programs and initiatives, our voices are being heard. But it's not only about ticking the button or ticking the box that you are welcoming the women in cyber. Look about the progression in their career. The initiative should be attract, retain, and develop, not attract, keep them, and then when they get bored because they don't get any promotion, then they will just leave and they will say they're not welcome.
Yeah, so that's my question. What about the leadership level? Actually, women should be at the leadership level. So, can they be promoted to the leadership level? How much percentage do you know?
At this time, we don't have a real statistics yet about the women in leadership position, but that is our aim. Initially, the objective is to give a way to the new graduates to find have a foot forward into their career, and then let them grow in there. Also, in various capacities, we get them involved in panel discussions like this, either as a moderator or a panelist. We also celebrate their successes. We ask how many are taking certification exams, how many are passing the exam, how many has published a research paper or finished their bachelor's, master's, or PhDs. And we shout out these successes. And apart from that as well, of course, the challenge now that we are giving when companies are saying, oh yes, WIXME, you let us be aware that we should increase the women in our workforce. We already have 50%. The next question is, how many are there in the leadership position? That will be our next target.
Thank you very much. Any other female speakers? Do you have any comments on these issues? No? Yeah? Alison, will you?
I would just quickly echo that. I think it's really important to be talking about this, and I've done some research on the topic of gender and international cybersecurity, and the participation angle is very, very important, but I think it's also talking about the differentiated impacts and harm of different types of cyber operations. There's a lot of really excellent research out there that looks at internet shutdowns, for example, and how they impact people in a disproportionate way based on their gender, because it corresponds with the gender roles that they play in society more broadly. You mentioned deepfakes earlier. Deepfakes often go hand in hand with online or technology-facilitated gender-based violence. One of the projects that we're starting up at Stimson next year is going to be looking at gender, disinformation, elections, and national security, and how those things are all coming together in a unfortunately very mutually reinforcing way. So I think thinking about the participation, thinking about the harm. I think earlier you said something about the unintended risks, and that's also true for technologists. As you're developing technologies, you may not realize that what seems like an innocuous app could be transformed into stalkerware, to give one kind of commonly used example. So it's great that this has come up today. I'm happy that we're talking about it. I think it needs a lot more research and awareness raising, but it's also, we've done a lot, I think, in over a relatively short amount of time to already raise awareness and capacity in this area.
I'm also happy to talk about it. Actually, in the security sector, women has been for a long time talked as a kind of a victim, but victimized, like always a victim of law, a victim of war, something like that, But I want to stress that women can be a leader or a decision maker in security sector as well. Yeah. I want to point out in cybersecurity sector as well. Yeah, okay, thank you very much for our speakers. And then we have 5 minutes left. So now I want to open the floor to the audiences. So 1 or 2 questions to our distinguished speakers. So can you, raise your hands, please. I think over there, yeah, please.
Please stand up. May I ask you to please stand up? Thank you.
So I'm Brian. I'm a homeschooling student who's passing by. I'm interested in the digital security and cyber threats. And I'd like to bring up a question that is related to a little more obscure topic that we haven't dealt in the conference. And that's about basically intervention. And foreign intervention is one aspect of that. But I also think there is like a little bit of muddiness within cyber threats when it comes to intervention. Because I think that domestic actors and foreign actors sometimes really mix together when it comes to like intervening into manipulating social sentiments or political sentiments. And I was wondering how experts see this and how they are dealing with this kind of like intermixing. Thanks.
Okay. Manon, can you?
Yeah, I can say a few. So it is indeed something that is of concern, and the blurring of actors, both private actors, private sector companies, but also hacktivists or criminals working together with states and coming together in this awful mix of malicious cyber activities with different motives, different intents, helping each other out, also addressing different parts of the kill chain, which would then complicate any attribution or any effective response to it, is really a concerning trend. And here I would like to come back to the issue of accountability, but also the normative framework and the norms, rules, and principles that we have agreed upon at international level that actually require states to conduct practices, to keep their territory free from such activities, to tackle cybercrime, to protect their critical infrastructure, to not harm other critical infrastructure, to not knowingly allow such behavior to take place, is something that we really have to press for. So when we talk about accountability, that also starts not necessarily in a way with attribution, but it starts with states actually taking their responsibility in implementing the norms, rules, and principles that we have agreed upon at the international level, that include also the element of non-state actors and those acting from your territory, criminal actors, and the work in that context. The UN Cybercrime Convention also contributes to that, with how having a UN convention actually addressing criminal behavior in this area. So the muddiness of actors is something that is of concern, and that requires actually a state to step up its efforts in this field. There it should be acknowledged that not all states actually do this, because when we're talking about incentives, when you're talking about political will, then you may ask yourself, what is the incentive of DPRK? What is the incentive of Russia to actually stop certain actors, private actors, from the territory? And I think we all know the answer there. So that is something that we also have to take into account, that yes, political will is something, but maybe we should then look at the political will and the incentive of the global community to stop that type of behavior by imposing norms and by imposing these consequences for not adhering to the normative framework in that context.
I will add one more point as an international law person. Because you mentioned the terminology intervention, according to UN Charter Article 2.7, there is the principle of the prohibition of a non-intervention principle. Most of states now, international community, accept this principle also applicable to cyberspace. So if you mean to state intervene with another state in case, if the case meets the condition of the prohibition of Article 2.7, probably it's a violation of international law. It's illegal according to, based on international law. So if you only mean the interference, probably Manon's explanation is perfect, I think. Yeah, thank you. We only have 30 seconds, so do you have another question? Okay, the last one.
Yeah, now it works. Thank you very much to all the panelists for a brilliant lecture. And my name is Anastasia. I'm from KAIST University here in Daejeon. And I also study nuclear policy and women inclusion in nuclear policy. So my question is a bit comparative. So how much change do you expect from the women inclusion in cybersecurity field? Because I also research it as a comparative for nuclear. Thank you.
Okay, goes to Irene.
Thank you. Good question. We are depending on regular or frequent survey by private entities globally, and we look at the impact of our efforts also globally. As WIXME itself, or the GFC itself, we do not conduct this survey, but it is also important that when surveys are conducted, these are equally, these are in all industries possible, not only in, let's say, critical infrastructure, but also in other sectors such as education, hospital, banks, transportation, telecommunication, and also in all region. The next step that we would like to see if there is already an increase, and we have seen that, as I mentioned, the last survey published last year was a very good indication already. And there's not only one Women in Cyber group, there are also WESF in the US, there are a lot of women in cyber in various areas and region, and these are all, we are all collaborating to create this, this awareness. And again, the focus is not only ticking the box to include women, but also look at the program on how to promote them. One of the things that I know it's coming is the women in quantum. So women in STEM in general, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Thank you very much for our distinguished speakers and audiences. I pass to 1 minute more. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please.